Welcome back to the podcast. Today, as I said before in the other previous interviews, we'll be trying to get more politicians in. And today we have Emma McBride, a federal member for Dobell. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Emma, could you please give us a little bit more information about yourself and for the viewers? So what are your roles within government and prior work before joining the government?
So I'm the member for Dobell on the Central Coast of New South Wales, and I was elected in 2016. I'm the Shadow Assistant Minister for Mental Health and for Carers. And before this role, I worked as a pharmacist, and I worked at our local hospital in Wyong as the chief pharmacist and also as a specialist mental health pharmacist for many years.
Great. So we'll now get started with the questions. Tobias, I believe you have the first question.
Yes. Has anybody contacted you from the Dobell electorate and said they have been suffering from mental health issues from the lockdown and the virus?
They have, Tobias. I know you're from Victoria and you've seen a quite severe and long lockdown, which has been different to the experience in New South Wales. But in my community, there's a lot of older people, and the advice from the very beginning was, particularly for people like my mum's age, that they should stay at home and self-isolate. So a lot of older people have felt alone and lonely during COVID, and that has impacted their mental health and well-being. I've also heard from younger people. I'm not sure what your experience, Tobias, has been, but many young people have had their schooling disrupted through COVID. One of my nephews was in his last year of school, and one of my nieces was in their first year of school. And I think at any stage during school, children or young people have been separated from their friends. They haven't been able to connect. They haven't been able to do the normal things that they would do. And this all has an impact on people's mental health and well-being. We've particularly seen people locally who have found themselves unemployed, whose businesses have folded, who are in financial distress. We've seen them coming to us seeking support. And as you would appreciate, those kind of stresses, those big financial pressures, rental stress, mortgage stress, can have a big impact on people's mental health and well-being.
So we'll now get on to the next question. Tobias, I believe you also have this question as well.
What type of mental health issues have people contacted you about?
So we know that through COVID, there are 4 groups of people that are most likely to be impacted. So there are those with pre-existing mental health problems. And some people have contacted me about that they've had a pre-existing problem which has been made worse through COVID, and they haven't been able to get the support they need. There's a large group of people that are frontline workers. And I've heard from particularly aged care workers who felt that they've been at risk themselves of being exposed to the virus because of the people that they're caring for, and that their family might then be exposed because of the work that they do. I've also heard from people who have been in quarantine. One man in particular found himself, he was overseas and then he ended up stranded in Western Australia, and he ended up in intensive care and ventilated. And that had a very severe impact on him, on his wife and their family, who were stranded and alone and having to deal with really major health problems. So they're the type of things that I've seen or that people have come to me for support for. There's also one that really struck me, and it was a young woman who wasn't able to visit her dad in an aged care home. He was a younger person in an aged care, and because of the very tight restrictions which were introduced in aged care, she was unable to see her dad for really long periods of time. He had a health and problem and a brain impairment that meant that he couldn't understand why his family couldn't visit him. And this was causing him and them a lot of distress.
Just to touch on some of those points as well, do you think the federal government's been doing a good job? Do you think the federal government's been doing a good job with the mental health crisis that we're going through right now? Or
I think that, this is unprecedented. It's a global crisis, and as the opposition, we've given as much support and worked cooperatively with the government through the pandemic, where they've introduced measures like increasing the cap on better access, where they've boosted funding to Kids Helpline or Lifeline. We've welcomed it. Where I would like to see more is, particularly as we're coming to some of the COVID support being wound back or withdrawn, like Job Seeker or JobKeeper. What I'm particularly worried about is people in financial distress who might now be more at risk. So that's where I'd like to see more support, because I believe the government's genuine in their actions to try to support people's mental health through the pandemic. But I think there's people who have been impacted socially and economically through the pandemic who could do with more support, and for some of those people that's now becoming critical.
So we'll get on to the next question now. I have this question. What ways did you advise people to cope with mental health during lockdown?
Yeah, Francis, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure what your experience or the experience of your friends, Tobias or George, have been. But the first thing that I would encourage people is to stay in touch, to stay connected, like we're doing today over Zoom. If you can't, because of lockdown or physical restrictions, if you can't see people, to try to stay in touch, have make that phone call, make that Zoom call. If people are experiencing, if it had triggered a mental health problem or crisis, as a former mental health worker, I would try to encourage someone to seek support. And if they were open to it, to try to link them in with a support service. I think something that I would encourage everyone to do, if you haven't had the chance, is mental health first aid. Mental health first aid available through the Mental Health Foundation Australia is first aid training that gives everybody the skills to be able to not just ask, are you okay, but then to see what next step is necessary. So I think, the first thing I would do is listen to somebody, encourage them to stay in touch and do the things that they enjoy or that improve their mental health and well-being. But if it did appear to me that they were experiencing some problem or needed some more support, I try to encourage them to seek support and to link in with it, and maybe help them to do that if I felt that was welcome.
What do you think are like the best web sites for people who are dealing with mental health to contact? What do you think they are?
I'd be keen to know what you've seen out there, because there might be some things that you're aware of that I haven't seen. But I know that Reach Out is particularly focused for younger Australians, and they've got some really good resources online. And I know that they were particularly encouraging people who were starting high school this week or next week to jump online and look at some of their resources, because that can be another time of pressure and can be quite overwhelming. So I think Reach Out have got some excellent resources. Also, Beyond Blue have got some really good resources that are available. They, when you think back to last year, starting out with the bushfires and then through the pandemic, and all of the challenges that people have faced, it's no surprise that a lot of people are feeling stressed or anxious. And I know Beyond Blue has got a lot of good resources there. Lifeline and Kids Helpline are also really good go-tos when you're looking for that kind of support. So they're just some that that I'm familiar with, but I'd be keen to know if there's others that you're aware of that I should help to spread the word about.
Do you guys have any, Tobias, George, do you guys have any other websites for Emma do you know any other websites for that, or
you can let me know later. Fine.
Yeah.
Done. Yeah.
We'll let you know later. Okay. So we'll get on to the next question now. George, I believe you have this question. I think this also links a lot to some of the other answers you've given us.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question is, if you had a mental health issue during the lockdown, what would you do during that time?
Yeah, George, it's a really critical question, and I know that some people with pre-existing mental health problems were reluctant to seek support. They didn't want to go to a hospital or clinic because they thought they might be exposed to or that they might catch COVID. So I know that some people are reluctant to seek support that they normally would. As I kind of touched on earlier, what I would do is encourage people to talk to someone that they trust, someone that they feel confident and comfortable that they can share things with, and to have a conversation. And I would encourage other people, if they notice, a friend or family member that doesn't seem themselves, to ask if they're okay. And then once you've started that conversation, to try to then engage the person with support or help as might be suitable for them. Some people prefer to go online, and that might be, through Reach Out or Beyond Blue, through a web chat, through a text exchange with Lifeline. Some people prefer that, to be able to go online. Some people prefer face-to-face. And so it might be about encouraging them to, have a Zoom meeting, have a Zoom appointment with their GP, who might then be able to link them in with a psychologist. So I think, there's still a lot of stigma about mental health in Australia. I know that since I first started working as a mental health worker, we've come a long way in being able to have more open conversations, but it still is something that some people are a bit hesitant to talk about. And I would just encourage people to start those conversations, and to where they can offer the support or link people in with support if that's the help that they need or might benefit from.
Yep. So we'll get on to the next question as well. George, I believe you also have this question.
Yeah, I do. So the question is staying at home the main cause for most of the mental health issues currently?
George, I'm not sure whereabouts in Victoria you are. Whereabouts are you today?
In
Yeah, George, you can answer.
Yeah, Point Cook.
Okay, all right. So did you experience, did you have to do school from home for a long period of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it for most of last year?
Yeah.
Or a lot of?
Yeah, a lot of last year.
Yeah.
I think it was. Was it actually like? I think it was it 2 terms? 2 or 3 terms actually.
You had I think a term and a half of normal school probably.
Right.
Yeah, I think we had.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we had what? Yeah, we had first term, and then I think we came back at the end of second term, like 2-3 weeks, and then the whole third term was online, and then we came back for fourth term.
Half of fourth.
Yeah, half of fourth as well. Yeah.
That's a long stretch, or several long stretches of time when you have to be working from home. When I was talking to young people in my community about school from home or being at home, there were some things that they raised with me. For some people, home isn't a safe place. It might not be a place where they are secure or safe. For some young people, they didn't have the technology. They had to share a laptop with their brothers and sisters, or they might not have had the internet connectivity that they needed. For some people, they also had other responsibilities at home. I spoke to one young man who was trying to finish school himself while trying to look after his little brothers and sisters, and his stepdad who had a disability and was at home. So I think for some people who are fortunate, who live in a safe home and they're well supported, it can be, a place where they can learn. For other people, it can be really, really tricky. So I think that staying at home has led for some people to more isolation and loneliness. And it's also meant that they've been separated from their friends or their schoolmates or things that they'd normally be involved with. So I definitely think that isolation and loneliness was a problem in Australia before the pandemic, but I think it's probably been heightened through the pandemic.
Yeah, so do you think that more people should, as well, you said before, connect more via Zoom or video conferencing and stuff, and talking to their friends so that they're not as lonely as they are?
Yeah, I think Francis, I think those are sort of things, they're day-to-day things that we can do to try to stay in touch with people, to be I had my niece with me recently, and she's 16 and she's a really keen soccer player. And she was saying that sometimes, not being able to kick a ball or go out to the park for her was a really big thing. So, or not being able to join people for birthday parties or other celebrations. So I think it has been, and everyone has experienced it differently. And depending on the stage of your life or the things that you'd normally be a part of, some people have felt it very deeply. So I think there's some day-to-day things you can do to try to stay in contact with friends and family members that can help you feel less isolated and a bit more connected.
So we'll now go on to the last question. Is what I'm asking this one. Do you think the rate of mental health cases will decrease once the pandemic is over and life can go back to normal?
We know that in Australia, in any year, that 1 in 5 people might experience a mental health problem. We've also seen in some pockets that increase risk of suicide or suicidal ideation, and there's a lot of work happening at the moment through Black Dog and others that are trying to really understand this. So I think that before COVID, we already had significant mental health and wellbeing problems in Australia, but I think they have been exacerbated or worsened by COVID. I would like to think that Australians could enjoy overall better mental health and wellbeing. But I think to do that, as important it is to provide mental health support and care for people in crisis, I think we need to take a step back and look at the causes and what a lot of these mental health problems might stem from. And it might be for a young person that, they're struggling with their education, or they're worried about what they'll do next. Will there be a job when they finish school, or will they get into the course they want to study? For some people, it's about housing stress, that they can't afford to live where they grew up or close to where they work, and that causes enormous pressure on them and their household. So what I would like to see is, I guess, what you kind of think about it as a health in all policies approach. So whenever the government is looking at things like education, housing, employment, that they look and think about it through, the lens of mental health as well. So I really think, as important as it is, and we welcome the government making investments in frontline services and mental health care during the crisis, I'd like to see in the recovery that we take a step back and have a broader look at what some of these mental health problems might stem from and how we might be able to address the causes of the cause, so that people, hopefully don't end up in crisis, so that we can avoid some of these problems. And particularly for young people, we know that early intervention is critical. And in the past, early intervention has often been seen as at high school age. But from the young people that I hear from and listen to, I think that we really need to start that early intervention earlier still. And I know that there is some good work happening in primary schools and for young people. And I think it's critical, because for some people, the right care or intervention in primary school can mean that they don't then live, with a mental health problem like anxiety or depression across their life. So I'm hopeful about the future and I'm optimistic, but I'd really like to see a health in all policies approach where we take a broader look at, some of the things that lead to or trigger mental health crisis or problems.
So those are all the questions that we have for you today, Emma. I really thank you for joining us on our podcast and discussing this with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I think this is a brilliant initiative that you've kicked off this podcast, and you're discussing some really important topics that are very relevant to young people. And what's so exciting to see is that it's led by young people. And I just, congratulate you on this initiative and wish you very well. So are you heading back to school or you're back to school, or what's next for your podcast?
Next week.
Yeah, we're going back to school on Monday next week.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, best wishes as you go back to school, and I hope you have a more normal year at school than you did last year.
Thank you again, Emma, for joining us, and I thank everyone for watching this, and I hope you guys have a good day.
My pleasure. Thank you.